Hey, it's Ken Gagne with YouTube channel Gamebits here to play Gathering Sky, a new game just released by A Stranger Gravity for PC, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android, playing it here on the Mac. I'll be speaking shortly with the developers of this game, and this game is about controlling a flock of birds. You start off with just the one, and right now I'm holding down on my trackpad button and guiding my one bird. I can make him go in circles, I can make him bump into walls, boom, boom, boom. No damage, bird's fine. And off I go. And there's another bird. As I get close to the bird, I can get to control both birds, and now I have a flock, or at least a pair. Maybe not a murmuration just yet, but I'm getting there. And I continue along my merry little path. And there's a little spirit, perhaps to guide me along the way, like a will-o-wisp, perhaps. I will follow it, and you can hear little background tinklings of tones as I chase after it. And music is very important to this game. The music is provided by the San Francisco Conservatory, directed by Dren McDonald. And the music swells and ebbs and flows and ties into all the different parts of the game as you explore different areas. And you can explore. See, I can just go off this way if I want and see what's over here up until I get to some impassable clouds, or I can go back down here and go pretty much wherever I want. And that is actually the point of the game, is just to enjoy yourself and not be stressing out over attacks or defense or finding things, just the ability to fly freely. Now here I am in a jet stream, which will guide me very quickly to where I need to go or where I want to go, or at least just somewhere. But I'm going to take a little detour here and pick up this other bird. Oh, and there goes something. So I'm going to go back up here and get back into the jet stream. And off I go. Now, I played this game for the first time at the Boston Festival of Indie Games 2013, when the game was at that point pretty much feature complete. It was quite playable. And you'll be hearing in my interview with the developers why it then took them another 2 years to polish it up into its final releasable form. Interest of full disclosure, those developers were also in the audience of my PAX East 2014 panel called Sex, Sexting, and Sexism, Fixing Gender Inequality in Gaming. And they also provide me with a Steam key for this game. And finally, the format for this podcast of interviewing developers while I play their games was actually formulated as a way to feature this game more than a year and a half ago. The game was not yet ready to be featured on YouTube because it wasn't out yet. So that idea was shelved until I found other games I wanted to apply it to, and thus was formed the IndieSider podcast. But it is nonetheless true that if it were not for Gathering Sky, this podcast would not exist, even if that was not the developer's intention. So I'm just going to spend a moment here chasing this floaty thing, see if I can catch it. Not doing a very good job. Oh. And my birds do sort of scatter if I don't give them a clear direction. So I don't know if I activated that crystal in this floating island or what. It did seem to resonate with that tone I released. And as you'll find in future levels of the game, and there are levels, this is level 1, and I think there are 5 total, there are particular threats to your flock. However, I don't believe you can actually lose. I don't believe it is game over. You just play for as long as you want, and you do whatever you want. I'm going to be following this jet stream as the sky swirls around me and the ground flows beneath me. And I'm picking up a whole bunch of birds here, and see, I can just try to scatter them if I want. I can even just let go of my mouse and just let them do whatever they want. But as soon as I hold down my mouse, they all gather back to that spot as much as they can or are able. So this may not fit your definition of a game because the threats to your birds, at least in this first level, are relatively non-existent, and the challenge is minimal, again, if non-existent. But that's not really the point of this game, as you'll find out in my interview. So I'm going to continue exploring the skies of Gathering Sky by Stranger Gravity, which you can find at gathering-sky.com, while I speak with 2 of the developers, so stay tuned. Today I am honored to be speaking with a talented duo from A Stranger Gravity, developers of Gathering Sky. Hello, John.
Hey, I'm John Austin, co-founder of A Stranger Gravity.
Thanks, John. And also with you is Matt.
Howdy, I'm Matt, the one of the other co-developers. We're a trio, and John and I are the software engineers / designers. Good to meet you all.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, John Austin. Hi, Matt Blair. So, I'm very curious to know, this game, Gathering Sky, came out less than a week ago. What has the past week been like for the two of you?
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. I mean, the game has been done like in terms of like code and all that stuff for I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks now. But all of the business and all of the press and getting it ready for the stores has just been kind of a lot of work. So this is our first commercial release. So all of the stuff on the side of just kind of getting it out there and all of that sort of stuff is kind of what's been busying us.
And it seems like you've been getting some pretty good press too. I even saw an article on offworld.com.
Yes, I was particularly happy about that. I didn't even have to go to the trouble of tipping them to it. Somehow it crossed their paths anyway, and Offworld and Destructoid and a surprising amount of sites have picked up on it, and nothing titanic in the global world of media, but in our circles it's been definitely very exciting.
Yeah, we got one feature recently from PC Gamer, which was pretty cool. Yeah, that's something that I 5 years ago or as a kid, like I would have been like, wow, PC Gamer, and so that's kind of like a little bit of fulfillment there.
So what is your secret? Because here at IndieSider, I get emails from developers who are releasing their first games all the time, and I can never give them all the attention that they want or deserve. How did you, as this being your virgin outing as a commercial product, get so many studios or so many press outlets to pick up on the release of Gathering Sky?
Yeah, I can probably talk about this because I've probably been the main business development, if you want to call it that role.
John's definitely the press man, yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, like the way I see it, I mean, I've been learning a lot in the last few years, just how this stuff works. I was lucky enough to be able to work on the game out here in San Francisco. So right now I'm in San Francisco. So last fall I was also out here, and I was able to go to events, meet people, go to different conventions and that sort of thing. And you sort of you start building contacts, you get introduced to some other people, you start making a few friends, and it kind of sort of works from there. Additionally, we were able to get some press lists from different conventions that we were accepted to and that sort of stuff. And I think it's mostly a matter of just like putting in the effort of sending the emails and responding to the emails and following up and just doing that enough and maybe building up some amount of just, I guess, not respect, that's not the right word, but like so that I guess trust is probably the better word. But I don't know. Partially, I'm still a little bit surprised myself because, after working on this for 2 years, and it's still kind of impressive that people think it's so interesting and cool, and it's like, yeah, I've seen this 1,000 times. So.
I think one reason it might be standing out is because this kind of game is not something people have seen 1,000 times. I get so many press releases about another mobile match 3 puzzle game. I've never gotten a press release for, here's a game where you control a flock of birds. I'm sure that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I think the nature of the game definitely makes it stand out from the majority of new games that probably come across people's desks. That gets you some distance of the way there, I would say. Catching people's eye is only one part of it, and I think John really hit it when he said it's all about just the footwork, really. Like, just putting in the hours and hours to follow up with all of these contacts, write these emails, make sure you're not just like spamming people, but trying to say something personal when you have something personal to say to people, and really maintaining your connections. And this is really not what I expected when I decided I wanted to try my hand at game development, but it's a huge part of making a product successful.
So what experiences led you to make this be your first game? Some people try something less original just to get their foot in the door or to make sure that they understand the mechanics of the games. But this kind of game is, as we said, unusual, and especially coming from a young studio with young developers, it's not what I would expect. So why a game about controlling a flock of birds?
One of the reasons we picked a subject that many would call kind of far out, probably, is that this is not something that we were relying on for primary sources of income. It's something that we knew we could be very experimental with, and when we realized that, we said, why not take something really far out and see how, see what we can do with it. In the embryonary stages of developing the game, we were thinking in terms of emotions. Really, this was not too long after Journey had been released, and several of us working on it were really, really big fans of that game company, and those similar sorts of unconventional but very moving kinds of experiences. And we looked at the potential for this new project in terms of trying to fulfill an emotional need that was not really present in the games that we saw in the market. When we look around, we see lots and lots of games that are really exciting and really challenging and really fun in certain senses. You can't see it, but there's huge scare quotes on fun right there. And it's a certain type of fun that's not really... it's not a fun that you would call, like, joyful or, like, I don't know, exuberant or lots of things that you would call fun in other contexts outside of games. It's the fun that's, like, very stressful and, tense and lots of things that people enjoy, but are not, the complete emotional diet that one needs. A lot of people have really stressful jobs at work, and they come home and probably don't want to, be yelled at by other people on Counter-Strike or, lots of other experiences that you can get right now. We were trying to make something that fulfilled the need of working with a system and a world instead of working against it and working against other people. We really wanted it to be a non-adversarial experience, and that just sort of manifested in something very collective, and that led to thinking of groups of creatures working together, and then flocks, and then the freedom of being in the open sky and moving quickly and gracefully, and all of these things just sort of fell out very naturally from this emotional experience that we were trying to create.
You say you didn't want to make an adversarial experience, but there are adversaries in this game, and I'll tell you, the first time that hawk appeared, I literally jumped out of my seat because I thought this was supposed to be a relaxing game.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I felt like I was in the middle of Watership Down and my bunnies were being picked off left and right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That part is not, I don't think anyone would claim relaxing. And
there's many parts of the game, actually, that are not necessarily relaxing.
But it's...
maybe you can continue.
It's a necessary part, we thought. Any emotion is meaningless without its sort of antipode, and the same is true of relaxation. In order or I don't know if relaxation is the right term, but the sort of tranquility and grace that we're trying to communicate, you really need to be jerked out of that sometimes, and to see the contrast there, to be able to appreciate other parts of it. And we feel like the contrast actually helps the overall experience. It's also, a nice bit of engagement that, when you're faced with this really dramatic contrast, it suddenly draws your attention very clearly into this world. And that helps later on when you're trying to further your emotional immersion, you could say.
When I first played the game 2 years ago at Boston Fig, I didn't get far enough to find out if there were hawks and thunderstorms in that version of the game. Was that part of the early concept?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very early on, actually. We had a non-digital prototype of the game that was... this was really interesting. We had this little tin cookie box, and... bear with me here. And we stretched over it a nylon stocking, and we were trying to simulate, without building a system in code or anything, we were trying to simulate what it would be like to move around a group of somethings. And so we had this box with stocking over it, and we put a bunch of Skittles on top of this, sort of resting over this, like, stretched sheet of nylon. And you could press into it, and sort of like people, like how you demonstrate gravity with like a rubber sheet. These Skittles would just sort of move around and follow your fingers when you put them down, and you could, move your flocks in different, like move your flock of Skittles in different directions and make different groups of Skittles, and it was more or less just feasibility check, like, is this totally dumb or not? And then part of that we had is, testing out the other emotional aspects of this. Someone was sitting opposite the person playing with with like a rubber band slingshot, trying to imitate this predator, and you would shoot the rubber bands at this thing and try and break up the flock. And that's like, from that point, before we even had code, we knew that we wanted that part in.
What are some ways that the game has changed or evolved in the 2 years since I first saw it?
It's actually kind of interesting, because the game as you played it in BFIG was very much kind of the complete experience, and very, very similar to what we have now. So since then, we've added another level, which we thought added a little bit of length and also sort of smoothed out the emotional curve, and added a few more playful objects. We added some clouds that you could draw in and that sort of thing. So we added a little more gameplay, but other than the whole San Francisco Conservatory thing, that was a new part. That's probably the biggest thing we've added. But other than that, it's surprisingly a similar sort of overall experience. But what we've put into it is mostly polishing. So we added much more detailed bird sprites. We've done a lot of work on adding more animations to the birds and trying to make the wind look a lot better. Just basically spending the last, I guess, year. It's almost 2 years now since BFIG, but just kind of polishing it up and working on it is to make it as kind of just perfect as possible. We all have really high standards, I think, in terms of what we want to release. So even the small things were kind of what we wanted to look at.
Yeah, John is downplaying the music here.
Yeah.
Did like all of the programming for that, and there's a not insignificant amount of programming. If you pay attention when you're playing through the game, the music tracks and the sound effects are cued at very specific times, and they blend into one another, and they loop when they need to, and lots of these fairly sophisticated effects. And John was managing all of that, and working with Dren too. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that's changed since.
Yeah. I mean, if I can talk about that. I don't know why exactly I was avoiding it, but. So what we have done since BFIG is that we brought on this new composer named Dren McDonald, and he actually approached us. He was actually one of the judges for IndieCade, and he was like, I really love, this was back after BFIG, but before we brought him on. So he judged the game as it was, and he was like, I really love your game, but the music is just awful, and it doesn't mesh at all, and he was just like really complaining about that, and he offered to kind of do a little kind of redub. So he took some gameplay video and sort of put something together to see what it might sound like, and we were completely blown away because it just sounded incredible. So we started working with him. I mean, it was an interesting process because we had never worked with kind of any kind of professional audio teams or anyone who's kind of done that sort of area. So it was fascinating to work with him. We ended up having to do a lot of code changes, writing a lot of bindings for Fmod Studio and stuff like that. It was kind of an interesting project. And eventually we sort of got the opportunity to take what he had written and record it with the San Francisco Conservatory, which was incredible because it basically just added this element of liveliness to the music that you really just don't get when you have samples and sort of pre-made music like that. So it really took it to the next level. And on top of that, like what we were doing before was that, I think Matt mentioned this briefly, but we were basically taking a single track and playing that throughout most of the level, and it didn't really adapt or change. But because we had this composer he was incredibly skilled and he could kind of do whatever we wanted, so we were able to make different layers come in and out at different times. When you get near the little sort of floaty, spirity type creatures in the game, you'll notice it's pretty subtle, but like sort of different background tracks will come in based on how far you are away from them, or when you're over their trails, you'll have this sort of bubbling sounds, and because we were designing that from the ground up, we could make it really inclusive and match what we were trying to accomplish with the game. So it was a great experience. It was fantastic.
It's really awesome that Dren approached you, because I was wondering what that pitch would have been like. Hi, we are a company that's never released a game. We're still in college. It's about birds, and will you please perform a string soundtrack for us?
Yeah.
But no, this was his idea, and wow, that's amazing that you had that fortune.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to make that pitch.
Yeah. It was interesting because, I mean, even with the old sound, he said it moved him enough that he really wanted to, take it to the next level. And I think he really believes in the project, and it was great that we were able to find someone that also sort of had the same mindset, the same sort of heading as to what kind of games he wanted to make.
So if Dren, as a judge, came to you and said, "I love your game, but your soundtrack needs work," full stop, and he didn't offer any help beyond that, what would the final game have sounded like? What would you have done with that feedback?
It probably, I mean, we get a lot of feedback, obviously. I mean, we definitely respect the judges. But, I mean, when our heads at that point, so this was, this is so weird being a year away from this point. But, so this was a year ago. And our heads were basically in release mode at that point. We were just getting the game ready for release. We put it through IndieSider, showing it off just to kind of get it out there. So, I mean, most likely we probably would just kind of gone ahead with the release because, we hadn't really worked with this sort of thing before. So, trying to jump in, with both feet is a little bit risky. It's also, we didn't really have any entrance point, first of all, for that matter. So it probably would have kept the same music. And I'm really glad he approached us.
Is it fair to say that Dren delayed the release of your game by like a year?
Oh, totally. That's entirely true. I mean, it was totally worth it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because you guys have very high standards, and when you saw that opportunity, you're like, how can we not take this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another change that the game underwent since I first saw it was the title. When I first saw it, it was called Apsis. Now it's called Gathering Sky. Why the change?
Well, alright. I'll fess up to this. I was the one who came up with Apsis. And I thought it was a great title. It's a totally real English word. No one believes this, but it is. It's a term that has to do with orbital mechanics, actually. It's one of either the furthest or nearest points of an orbiting body to its center of orbit. And the reason this is a good name is very metaphorical, but it's because this game is, in the way that I saw it at the beginning, this game is sort of about cycles of orbits and moving. If you play all the way to the end, you can see how it's sort of about orbits and maybe some things beyond Earth and stuff like that. And to me, this was, this was an original name. This is a game that's sort of hinting at something that's not totally literal and unusual enough where it'll be memorable. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of that. So, Apsis is not a really memorable word for a lot of people. I don't know. Apparently, a lot of people don't know orbital mechanics. Who knew?
Shocking.
Yeah. People later pointed out that it sounds like abscess, and there's just lots of not great marketing qualities about it. So, I guess this was like a year ago, maybe a year and a half. No, it was less than that. It was probably less than a year ago. We decided, okay, this needs to change. No one can remember what this thing is called, and it's just not going to be something that we can market very well. So the three of us on the team generated probably, I think it was literally 6 pages of names that we were considering, and it was an extremely labor-intensive process to narrow these down and pick out one that we thought would be searchable and memorable, and also, of course, appropriate and fitting and connotative of all the things that we want this game to embody. And Gathering Sky has, it has the flock gathering aspect to it, and we think it's just a nice, positive, uplifting sort of ring to it. So that's what it is now.
Now, we talked about the soundtrack. I have a question about the visuals. As the flock is making its migration, the ground over which they're flying changes. Sometimes it's very pastoral, sometimes it looks cold, sometimes it looks hot. Are these any particular lands that you're modeling the game after? Is this supposed to be set in a real place?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's an overall sort of internally that we have this kind of idea of this world is. But it's not like necessarily a real place that we're necessarily trying to model out. We definitely, so Crystal, who did all of the artwork, she's incredible, but she took a lot of inspiration from like aerial photography, looking at how our city is aligned and what do things look like from above. So in that way, it's inspired very much by Earth and kind of the way humans have sort of set up civilizations. But it's not necessarily like it's a one-to-one mapping between a specific area, or specific place in the game. It was mostly about trying to take this emotional arc that we started with at the beginning of the game and map that into the background. And so in the beginning, it's very playful. There's little red houses dotting the green landscape, and as you get further on with like the hawk, the colors get have a little more contrast in them. You get some like deep purples and that sort of stuff. So it's basically trying to sort of map the game out in terms of color, and then sort of see what we can go from there.
Yeah, at one point in the early stages of development, we decided that it would be a cool idea to map out the entire game as just like one line of color and see what the whole thing looked like together. And it pretty much lined up perfectly with the emotional arc that we'd drawn out to develop the narrative. Well, sort of narrative, but that was a fun exercise.
That's really interesting that you have all these different progressions that you had to calculate to weave in and out of each other. You have the narrative, the emotion, the color, Dren's soundtrack, all weaving in and out of each other. That must have been very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Yeah, that's probably the biggest constraint on, like, if we had wanted to add, if we had some idea of an interaction that we wanted to add to the game, and if we had to think about where that would go, the big constraint is the fact that we have all these different arcs that basically have to line up exactly for the game to work at all. And so we can't just add another level somewhere. We'd have to fill out the arc in every aspect to match that and make sure it doesn't detract from any other part of the game.
Now, as the birds are migrating, there is some option that the players have to explore this world. They don't have to stick to the air current. They can go off on their own path as far as the world extends before they hit impassable clouds, and they can find these little glowy spirits, as you mentioned, that cause rocks in these floating islands to resonate, or they can just ignore those and keep going on their way. What is the correct way to play this game?
So it's a good question, because I think we get that question a lot. A lot of people pick it up and ask us if they're doing it right. Like, am I playing correctly? Like, I think one of the core tenets that we wanted to achieve with the game was to kind of create a game that you can, that however you're playing it, it's enjoyable for you. So we wanted to make it fun for the person who just sort of like, sits back and watches the birds go and doesn't really give them too much guidance. And then we also wanted to try to make it fun for the people who really like to get in there and kind of explore every nook and cranny. And I think we were able to kind of come across a nice balance there. It's kind of an interesting design problem to try to design sort of for those sorts of different play styles all at once. But we try to, in terms of your question, we try to not impose any kind of way to play the game. And if you're enjoying yourself, like that's the way to play the game.
Yeah, I'd say it definitely was one of the biggest design problems we faced in terms of designing interactions. It's one of the primary goals we had in the interactions we were designing, is that we wanted it to appeal to people who don't play a lot of games. And people who don't play a lot of games, when you hand them any game, basically, they're almost immediately going to question whether they're doing things right. And it's just not a positive thing to be telling yourself that you're doing something wrong, or that this isn't the way someone expected you to do something, and that this is not fun anymore and it's your fault. And we absolutely wanted to avoid that, because this experience, the emotional experience that we wanted to convey, is absolutely not anything that needs to be constrained to just gamers. So because of that, we had to try and make it always feel like you're never playing the wrong way, which there isn't a whole lot of game literature on. Many people try to make something that you can't lose at. So it was very challenging.
So there's no way for the players to really do it wrong, but what about the birds themselves? Are they behaving right according to how birds should behave? Like, if a hawk comes and scatters a flock, is that actually a physics-based simulation of how birds behave? Is this basically what I'm asking? Is this game modeled after real-world birds?
Yeah, I can definitely take this one. So it's kind of interesting. People and the humans, I think, in general, have been interested by the way that birds move for a long time. So you can look all the way back to the 60s. And in fact, the algorithm we're using to simulate the birds is something called boids, BOIDS. And it's just such a super old algorithm, and it's in my opinion, this algorithm is actually one of my favorites because it's so beautiful, because it creates these interesting and complex interactions, but the rules are so simple. So I can go through it real quick. So basically, the way it works is that just every bird, when it's flying, it looks around itself at the flock around it, and it sort of tries to fly towards other birds. Then also it tries to steer away from other birds a little bit so it doesn't crash. So if they get too close, they'll steer away. And then the last one, which is probably the most important, is just that they will steer towards the average direction of the birds around them. So if their friends are moving one way or starting to turn, then they'll sort of turn with them. And what's fascinating, and this is also used for fish and other sorts of grouping animals, but it's fascinating that if you take this model, this super simple algorithm, and compare it to actual flocks of birds and animals and herds, it's really, really similar. In fact, it's like, and that's why it's been around for so long, just because it's just so elegant and it works so well. And there's actually, when we were researching for the game, you can go online and find a ton of videos of starlings flocking or different types of birds, and we found this really great video of a hawk attacking a flock of starlings. It's really cool. I definitely recommend trying to search that up. But you can see how the birds will split up, and if you sort of map it back to this Boyd's algorithm, it's very, very similar. It's really cool.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that there were algorithms that were half a century old that could be used for a game like this.
Yeah, it's something that I really actually kind of. That's part. The history is kind of why I like it. It's really interesting.
Gathering Sky came out simultaneously for PC, Mac, Android, and iOS. And I've featured a lot of games on this podcast that are available for all those platforms, but not often all at once. They'll come out on mobile first and then move to desktop, or more often vice versa, because they find that releasing a game on mobile and then trying to raise the price for desktop is not often well met, whereas releasing on desktop and then cheapening it for mobile is an easier transition, whereas you chose to release on all the platforms simultaneously. What was the thinking behind that approach?
I just want to point out that we are also available on Linux, and I find that important.
Oh, I you know what? I actually looked that up on Steam, and I didn't see the little Linux icon on Steam.
Oh, I think they call it SteamOS now, I think.
Okay.
It's kind of unclear on Steam, but yes, Linux as well.
Very important correction. Thank you.
Only important to me, really. But it's been, this difference that you've just pointed out is one of the main reasons why the game has been, 95% done for a long time. It's that the design of the experience was finished, and then we looked ahead at all the platforms that we wanted to hit, and it's a substantial amount of work to get confidence that you're going to have a quality experience on all of these platforms, and not just focus on one and release it and focus on another and release it. I could talk for hours about this. I think that there's probably a lot of wisdom in focusing on one platform and making that the best experience possible. There's so much involved in making things work across devices, particularly on Android, that it's debatably worthwhile and probably of really questionable value for small studios. If you have a team that's dedicated to quality assurance on lots of platforms, that might make sense. However, for indies, I think I'm glad that we did this once to see everything that's involved, but man, is it a lot of work.
one of the reasons why we went fully cross-platform is that we just kind of the initial goal of the game was not necessarily to sell a ton of copies. I mean, we obviously wanted to make try to make back what we invested in the game, but we really just wanted to get it in the hands of people, and we felt like while it was substantially a lot of work when we got down to it, it felt like a kind of a good move just to be able to so like everyone that we wanted to play could play. So yeah, in many ways, actually, I feel like we kind of got a little bit lucky because, like Matt said, I don't know necessarily if we'd want to do this again when we're doing the next serious project because it takes so much time. I mean, much of the last year. I mean, when we say it hasn't changed, the surface level hasn't necessarily always changed, but a lot of the underlying stuff has. So while we might not want to do it for the next project, I feel like it kind of just worked out. And actually, you mentioned that the price thing that has been stressing me out for the last 6 to 8 months. It's like in my nightmares at the moment. I mean, because I'm here in San Francisco and talking to other developers, they're saying, yeah, no, you never, put a price differential on the same product on 2 different platforms. Like, just go poorly. It's a bad idea. And we did it, just to say we could, I guess. And so far, we've had a great response. Like, we haven't had anyone even mention it. And I'm really glad we took that risk now to kind of diverge from the norm, because I don't want to get into the economics too much, but I mean the price you can sell a game at is really not based on the product itself. This is something that we've kind of been figuring out. It's really based on the market. So the same thing that's on Steam versus iOS, it needs a totally different price because it's a different set of people buying it. It's a different set of surrounding sort of media. So we felt like it was most honest to the game itself to have different prices there. And we're really, blessed that everyone's sort of taken that and hasn't really, gone up in arms. Maybe the game is calming enough that it sort of soothes all the naysayers.
Now, did I interpret one of your emails correctly that you're recommending people who are buying the desktop version do so through Humble Bundle instead of Steam?
Mm-hmm.
And why is that?
Well, Humble Bundle is, you get the same game. You actually get a Steam code. And the benefit is we get more cut, especially if you buy it through the widget on our site. We get a higher, profit cut. You're also giving to charity. You can't get wrong with that. You're supporting kind of more of an indie. Humble's a great company, so supporting them is also another thing that I'm really a big fan of. So, you're not going to get a different game, but in terms of who you're choosing to support, I think we're definitely in favor of Humble.
And there's nothing in the Steam contract, for example, that says you can't openly discourage people from buying your game through them?
We can't really talk about the Steam contract, but
yes,
but it's selling it on Humble and Steam is totally fine.
Yeah,
fair enough. Excellent. Okay, so we talked about the different platform releases and the differential in the prices. What I'm curious to know next is, where does A Stranger Gravity go from here? This is an unusual first outing for a new company. How do you follow that up? Do you next simulate the migration of elk across the plains of North America? Do you do Gathering Sky 2? Well, what's next?
Elk is actually a DLC that's forthcoming. No, I'm just kidding.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, I would personally love to know the answer to this question. I think we've been talking a lot, and we have some ideas of where to go, but really it's been just sort of a crunch for a while to make sure everything goes well with this launch, and our plans are a little bit nebulous, but the one certain thing is that we need to, and once the dust settles on Gathering Sky, we need to take a break from making a monolithic project as a team and work on some smaller stuff. This being the first project, we've really found our limitations, and we know the things that we need to work on to get better as craftspeople, and a lot of that is just like prototyping, making lots of little things and experimenting and getting better at iterating and getting better at throwing things out. Probably some practicing on that for a while, and beyond that, up in the air. No pun intended.
Ha! Because a lot of companies have sort of a aesthetic to their products. There's a DNA that connects all their games. Even when they're different intellectual properties, you can look at a game and say, oh sure, that game must be by this developer or this publisher. What do you want A Stranger Gravity to be known for 5 years down the road?
That's a really tricky question.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can probably both give answers to this. Hopefully they're not different. But I think one thing that we want people to see in all of our games is that they're thoughtful and respectful towards the player, and I mean that in terms of not being full of fluff, not trying to extort people for money or any of the things that you can see in mobile games sometimes, but definitely respectful and trying to and making an experience that actually aims to teach you or better you as as an emotional or intellectual being, and this is extremely lofty, so you'll be forgiven if this comes off as pretentious, but I think there is really a lot of potential, as we've seen demonstrated with Gathering Sky, I think, in terms of actually meaningfully improving emotional well-being of people with these interactive experiences. And that's something that I could see us continuing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I have nothing to add.
Awesome.
I'm sure it's a relief to both of you that you're on the same page.
Well, we've talked about this a lot, but
perfect. Just like we were hopes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Exactly.
Excellent. Well, I've really enjoyed playing Gathering Sky, and I've really enjoyed hearing more about how it came to be and where it's going from here. Remind our listeners where we can find more information about Gathering Sky online.
You can find more about Gathering Sky at gathering-sky.com.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, too.
Thanks for having us
It's been
on.
great talking with you.